Hi, let's try this again. I tried to do today's video from Mackin Park Christmas light display, but the Wi-Fi, they have Wi-Fi there, but it was too weak to do the whole video. So I've been posting these videos as a form of therapy to recover from the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Kierans, be locked up by the BC, British Columbia, Canada, New Democratic Party government for 588 days. They locked him up in his group home, operated by l'Arche, a neo-Roman Catholic organization that is quite evil. Was started by two sex predators, Jean Vanier, Canadian retired naval officer, and Thomas Philippe, a French from France, defrocked Catholic priest. They started l'Arche in the 1960s as a way of getting access to young women, young immigrant women that work there. And these group homes are all over the world. They preyed on these young women for about 50 years before Jean Vanier died in 2019, and then people were brave enough, the victims, the workers at l'Arche were brave enough to come forward. So it was, but they were never investigated. l'Arche, L''ARCHE, was never investigated by the police that I'm aware of. They just did their own investigation, and they wrote a 1,000-page report, which was a mea culpa to the 28 victims that were documented. They say that the residents, so these homes were started as residences for mentally incapable adults, like my brother. And they said that the residents were not affected by Jean Vanier's sick, predatory behavior. But it was not an auspicious way for l'Arche, or background for l'Arche. And what they ended up doing is the government and l'Arche created a secret power of attorney in February of 2021 to sign away all of my brother's civil rights as a human being to my 82-year-old Catholic nun sister, 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario, with whom he's never lived. At the time, Paul had 5 surviving siblings, adult siblings like me. I live 13 kilometers from him, and I have for the last 30 years. So they didn't tell any of us. They just secretly created this document, and they forged Paul's signature. They had they never allowed him to have legal advice or to visit a lawyer. They had 2 of their low-level workers, these personal care aides, who were immigrants from, well, not Canadians, but immigrants from some other country. That's l'Arche's business model, is that young women who are passing through Canada or through any country, they hire them as personal care aides for these incapable adults. So they basically deprived Paul of all of his civil rights. I didn't find out for a year. In January of 2022, they terminated all of Paul's contact with anyone who was not associated with l'Arche. Truly evil. Unlawful and evil, both unlawful and evil. They terminated all of Paul's contact with people who were not employed by l'Arche. And they said it was because there was a COVID-19 outbreak. And the reason that they created this forged power of attorney, fraudulent and forged power of attorney, was to give Paul the COVID-19 shot without consulting with family members. I have a sister who lives on Vancouver Island who is a COVID-19 skeptic. She's anti-COVID-19 vaccines, and they wanted to do an end run around her. She actually Well, the nun has never lived with Paul and only met him on a few occasions over the course of his then 64 years. My sister had actually cared for him, and I cared for him at my home 1 or 2 weekends a month for 10 years. So they chose somebody who had no contact, who did not understand Paul's speech, and who we now know is an evil nun. I was estranged from her at the time for other misbehavior that she had with regards to our vulnerable family members. So I'm trying to just document what happened to Paul in case something happens to me, because Paul died waiting for justice. So they created the fraudulent and forged power of attorney on February 1 of 2021. They terminated his visits with all outsiders on January 10th of 2022. And so I applied to become his guardian in February of 2022 when I just couldn't get them to reinstate his visits with me. And then on August 26th of 2022, I complained to the Burnaby RCMP. I went and I spoke with an RCMP constable. I brought a photocopy of the fraudulent and forged power of attorney and tried to show it to her. She wouldn't look at it. And what she said she would do is she would get a warrant and a search warrant for the original power of attorney. And she would interview the witnesses, these low-level workers at L'Arche. She never did either of those things. All she did was she tipped off L'Arche that I had complained. So I went to her on August 26th of 2022, and L'Arche's lawyer wrote my evil nun on August 30th. So 4 days later, the lawyer wrote my sister and said if she didn't terminate contact by Paul with me, I was his last surviving family member from a big family in the Lower Mainland. So the L'Arche lawyer, Tara Britnell, ordered L'Arche to terminate Paul's visits with me, or they would evict him. Who cares? The British Columbia New Democratic Party government has hundreds, perhaps thousands of group homes, and Paul only has one family member left in Greater Vancouver. So on September 12th, the nun's lawyer, Ottawa lawyer, so the Catholic Church ended up hiring 2 law firms, one in Ottawa, one in Vancouver. I estimate they spent $500,000 fighting this. And all the time, I didn't even know what was going on. But they knew. They knew it was fraudulent and forged. And they knew that they have created L'Arche has created hundreds of these fraudulent and forged powers of attorney to take away the rights of incapable adults living in their residences. So they knew how bad it was, although I didn't know. So for 588 days after the L'Arche terminated, or the BC government, the New Democratic Party socialist government headed by David Eby, I call him Evil Eby, they terminated Paul's visits with me. We were allowed a 10-minute telephone call once a week on Friday afternoon. And Paul would beg me to visit him, and he would tell me over and over again that he loved me. He's my last surviving family member. Everybody else has died. My mother has died. My brother Harry has died. My sister Teresa has died. And my sister Brenda has moved to Vancouver Island. So Paul and I were the only ones left. I just want you guys to understand how truly evil this and unlawful and how wrong this British Columbia New Democratic Party government is with David Eby, who I believe they hijacked this last election on October 19th using this new digital voting system. Anyways, so for 588 days, Paul was locked up. And I went to the Supreme Court of Canada twice. I fought every way that I could think of. And we went to the Court of Appeal of British Columbia on February 6th of this year of 2024. And we were not successful. And Paul, on March 28th of 2024, my application or my appeal of the decision appointing the evil nun, Paul's guardian, was dismissed by the British Columbia Court of Appeal. What I didn't know is that the RCMP Police Oversight Agency in Ottawa, this is a little bit complicated, but please follow along. In the background, the RCMP Oversight Agency in Ottawa had ordered the Burnaby RCMP to reopen its investigation into this fraudulent and forged power of attorney. I didn't know that. They sent me a letter. The Burnaby RCMP wrote me a letter on March 27th of 2024, this year, just before we got the decision from the British Columbia Court of Appeal. They sent me a letter saying that they were ordered by their oversight agency in Ottawa to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. But I didn't know it because they didn't send me the letter for 3 weeks. And in that period of time, Paul, I believe, gave up. He had a stroke on April 13th of 2024 this year, and he ended up in Burnaby General. They didn't tell me until 2 days when they wanted to see if he was going to die, but he didn't die. He hung in there. And so 2 days later, the nun's evil lawyer, Casey Deanshaw, emails me at 8 o'clock at night and said that Paul's had a stroke, and I could arrange a visit through him. So the evil nun allowed me to have 10-minute visits once a day when Paul was in Burnaby General. So apparently the reason I couldn't visit him was he might be evicted from L'Arche. But even when he was in Burnaby General, the evil nun would only let me visit him for 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day after he had had a stroke. But I sat in the lobby for 10 to 12 hours a day for the 10 days that he survived after the stroke. I didn't know about the RCMP Oversight Agency in Ottawa ordering the RCMP to reopen the investigation, but the nun knew, because everything that the Burnaby RCMP were told, they conveyed to the nun's lawyers, but not to me. So when they were ordered to reopen the investigation, they told the nun's lawyers, but they didn't tell me. They didn't tell me until April 21st. I was sitting waiting in the lobby at Burnaby General. I get a phone call from Staff Sergeant at the Burnaby RCMP saying that they'd been ordered to open the investigation, their investigation into themselves. And then he sent me the letter that was by then 3 weeks old. So our Burnaby RCMP were slow walking everything they were ordered to do by their oversight agency. And Paul couldn't survive them slow walking everything. I went to court the next morning before a judge, and when the nun knew that I knew that the Burnaby RCMP were ordered to reopen the investigation, Paul had to die. So Paul had been recovering. Once he saw me, and once that I said, Paul, it's Kathleen. I went in this visit. I was allowed. He grabbed my hand and he squeezed it like a steel vice, and wouldn't let go until they made me leave. And then the next visit, he grabbed a big coffee table book from my hand. He sat up, and he turned the pages perfectly, and he scanned the pictures perfectly. So he was recovering. But once the nun knew that I knew that the Burnaby RCMP had been ordered by their oversight agency to reopen the investigation into her fraudulent and forged power of attorney, he had to die. So they took away his ventilator. He was wearing a ventilator when I first saw him on April 15th and every day after. But once the nun knew on April 22nd that I knew that the Burnaby RCMP were investigating her fraudulent and forged power of attorney, Paul's ventilator was taken away. His catheter was taken away, and I believe that he was sedated to death. So he was struggling to recover, but he couldn't handle having his ventilator removed and being sedated to death. I believe he was sedated to death with hydromorphone, which is an opioid. So they did everyone that I've described this to says it sounds like they did medical assistance in dying on him. So the people who do not live in Canada, you may not know that Canada has sunk to the depths of pre-World War II Nazi Germany, where it kills disabled and vulnerable people who are not dying naturally. But the one thing that the doctors are not allowed to do is they cannot yet kill mentally children or mentally incapable adults, like my brother. And Paul had been declared mentally incapable 6 months earlier. So he could not have consented to medical assistance in dying, but that's exactly what Burnaby General did to my brother at the orders of the evil nun. And I believe the evil nun's lawyer phoned her on the morning of April 22nd after I had appeared in court and after he knew that I knew that the RCMP were investigating the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. He phoned the evil nun, or he texted her and he told her to kill my brother. So they took away his ventilator and they shot him full of hydromorphone or some sedative. He couldn't handle, his respiratory system could not handle both having his ventilator removed and being shot full of a sedative. And now what they're doing is they have gone to court to have me declared a vexatious litigant and to take away my right to defend myself. So most of the litigation that I've been involved in the last 10 years has just been defending myself and trying to get my disability benefits reinstated by Manulife. And what they've done is they've worked together with Manulife to take away my rights to represent myself. And I appeared before a judge on November 18th and November 19th, and I told the judge I have a potentially life-threatening cardiac condition. I'm disabled too, and I am not allowed to appear in court for longer than 2 hours at a time. And every judge that I've appeared before has respected those doctor's orders. I've got a written medical certificate. But this judge, Judith E. Hoffman, barreled through. And so when I stood up at 12 o'clock and I said, I have to leave on doctor's orders, she had sneered earlier when I said, I've got a medical condition and I can't stay longer than 2 hours in court. But she had pre-written the decision. She had a 32-page decision, which she released. And I'm trying to get these facts on the record so that everyone can see in case anything happens to me. So I stood up and I left. And she went ahead past the 2 hours till 12:30 on November 19th. She went for a full day on November 20th and a full day on November 21st, ignoring and recklessly. I have never seen a judge act in such a palpably reckless manner as to she was daring me to have a heart attack right in front of her. So I've complained to the Canadian Judicial Council against her. And I've applied for leave to appeal the decision that I am a vexatious litigant. I'm not a vexatious. When I've talked to other lawyers, they say, your nun's sister is the vexatious one. But, I'm fighting this evil socialist British Columbia New Democratic Party government and the Catholic Church. That, a disabled 69-year-old former lawyer. But I'm still going to win. I have enough faith in this system, and I've seen it work. And my experience is that when I get my ducks in a row, I never lose at the Court of Appeal. I have never in my life lost at the Court of Appeal. Before my accident, before I became disabled, I never once lost at the Court of Appeal. And I've got my mojo back, and I'm going to win. And I'm going to win for you and for Paul. So they killed Paul, and now they're trying to kill me. Like I said, this Judge Judith Hoffman went past my 2-hour limit, daring me to have a heart attack right in front of her. I've had a heart attack before in November of 2016. I've got lupus, and I'm legally a disabled person. And she was so reckless, she just dared me to stand in front of her and have a heart attack. So that's it for today. Please continue contributing to our GoFundMe account. The way that this Judge Judith Hoffman wrote her decision declaring me a vexatious litigant is that I have to file 2 notices of appeal. So that costs double the amount. It cost me, I've spent $400 in filing fees so far, $680 so far. So please contribute to our GoFundMe account. And your words of support and your prayers are much appreciated. I miss you all. Paul, I miss you. I hope you're having fun in heaven with Teresa and Harry and Murray and Mom and Dad. Take care, everybody. Happy New Year.